Before we get started, just a reminder that you can find all of my available rental properties on my website at marcguzman.com. If you own investment property, click on the Owner Services section to see our complete list of services. Thank you to our sponsor for today's episode, East Brother Beer. Located on Canal Boulevard in Point Richmond, East Brother Beer mixes classic brewing styles with precision and modern sensibility to create the perfect Bay Area craft beer. Last winter, we had Nick Ishimaru on the podcast to talk about A Noh Christmas Carol, a retelling of the classic tale of a mix of traditional Japanese theater forms of Noh, Kyogen, Kabuki, and avant-garde dance. This year, Nick has another play set to release at the Theater of Yugen called Seen by Everyone, which opens this week on October 5th. This production takes a look at how the world expresses emotions of grief and loss, but through the hyper-connected world of social media. We'll talk to Nick about the production of the play, as well as how he brought the themes explored into the story.
Gutting it right now and changing everything, so we moved downstairs, and that's going to last probably another 10 months or so, something like that. Huge renovations.
Okay.
So, yeah.
Wow, 10 months, huh?
Yeah, completely redoing everything. We discovered there's original ceilings in the building that we'd never seen before.
Oh, fun.
When they installed recessed lighting, I guess, like in the 90s, someone got the brilliant idea to put in a false drop ceiling instead, and then just put can lights above that. So they completely cut off all the original ceilings in the entire house by about 1.5 feet, 2 feet.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, so we went through and ripped out all the false ceilings and discovered we have these beautiful beveled ceilings with these old Victorian style flourishes and things on it.
What was the style like?
Yeah, it's a classic Victorian. The house was built in the late 1890s, and it's got all these beautiful details and finishings that have been completely sealed against time for the last 20 years. This is kind of like a time capsule house right now.
Very cool, though.
Yeah.
Yeah, it'll add a lot more character to the final design for sure.
Yes,
because I imagine you're keeping it.
Oh, yeah, absolutely. If this house survived the earthquake, it's going to survive renovation.
Yeah.
Yeah,
very cool. So we had you on the podcast almost a year ago. It was December.
Yeah,
in my old office. And now we're here in the, a little bit upgraded, fancier studio.
Yes.
So what's been going on with theater and your show productions in the last year?
Yeah, so let's see. Last time I was here, I was talking about No Christmas Carol, and which we are going to be doing again this year as well, the whole month of December. Christmas Carol went really, really well. It was very positively received. We sold really well. After that, we did a piece on political activism and resistance using both traditional Japanese theater and some original adaptations that we developed in-house to protest the Trump administration and to protest immigration policy in particular. That one went really well as well. We had a great time with that, developed a whole new core of actors that we were working with, had some really positive reception and feedback on some of the pieces we were looking at, and it helped reignite what we want to do as a company and about the place that we want to be in terms of activism and being able to give people a voice, especially voices to those that aren't as represented in mainstream culture or society. So that was a really exciting event. We only did that for 2 weeks in May. And then we do a yearly event in July called Yugen in Action, where we talk about it's a work in progress series where we invite artists from all around the Bay Area to submit work on a specific prompt, usually on the theme of the season. And last season it was on community activism and resistance. So we got artists from all over the 9 Bay Area counties to produce work. It was either 2 or 3 person shows and about 2 hours worth of work. And it was gorgeous material. People in all stages of development, from very basic readings to final stage productions they were shipping out. So,
very neat.
Yeah.
Very neat.
Yeah.
So the No Christmas Carol. So we talked about it last year on the podcast. This year, is it going to be the exact same play, or are there going to be small little variations?
I'm making small changes. Nothing huge. We are going to have some new cast members rather than the ones we had last year, just because they, being wonderful, talented actors, are already booked in other projects. So I wasn't able to keep all of them. One of our actresses, Micah Kavita, is coming back, and so I'll have her still. And otherwise, I've recast with other big performers here in the Bay Area. So it'll be a really interesting experience. Otherwise, though, the production is essentially the same. So if you didn't get to see it last year, you'll get to see it this year, and it'll be even better.
Yeah.
Nice. Yeah.
So what has your attention right now? I mean, is all your attention focused right now on the latest production, or Is there something else out there that's capturing your mind?
Well, right now, especially this weekend, all of my attention is focused on Seen by Everyone, which opens October 5th and runs through October 21st at the theater.
I'll be there for the opening.
Oh, good. Okay, I'm glad to hear that. Seen by Everyone is a piece that was commissioned, or sorry, not commissioned, it was developed by another company in New York called Five on a Match. Sort of digression here. One of their company members, one of their founding members, is a longtime Theater of Eugen company member and a good friend of mine. His name is Enormous Munoz. You can find him on Facebook. He performs all over, and he has become he's part of Actors Equity, the professional union of performers now. We did a project together about 5 years ago. He moved to New York and helped found this company, Five on a Match. And they wanted to explore how social media has impacted our lives. So they scraped together, I shouldn't say scraped together, but they scraped social media posts. And from that, they culled over 2 years of social media. And they cut it down to 7 distinct characters and imagined what it would be like if our social media personas, not necessarily ourselves, but how we present ourselves online, if they met in a place like a bar.
That'd be scary.
It would be very scary, and that's actually the whole point. It's a criticism of social media and analyzing how we present ourselves, what kind of artifice goes into our personas. How do we say things online, and how does our syntax change in a way that changes who we are? And if we were to meet in a setting like this bar, what would it be like if we were actually trying to have these conversations face to face? So their original production back in 2016 in New York was fairly well received. They got very positive critical feedback, but there was a sense that it was a lot of tongue-in-cheek without having much purpose to it. And what they had really wanted to be discussing was, how do we express grief and loss online? That's what they were originally aiming at. They had surrounded the story of a young woman who had committed suicide, and were interested in the reactions of survivors, of people that she had known and her friends and her family, or in the original iteration, looking at other ways than that those people expressed different kinds of grief. Like there was a divorce at one point, there was the splitting up of a relationship, there was loss of pets, things like that. And so how do people memorialize that online? And in this iteration, they wanted to focus much more on the ritualistic aspects of public grieving. So they cut out a lot of the extraneous material in the piece and focused it much more heavily on the loss of this one young woman and her surviving family members, and figured out what elements of those shared stories are public expressions of grief in a ritual way. And they wanted to pair with Theater of Eugen in particular because of our work in traditional Japanese theater and our work in Noh. And Noh Theater, I think I talked about it last time.
Yeah, so for a lot of the listeners and viewers that may not be familiar with the podcast, go back. Sam, if you can look up the episode number, we'll mention it later. But,
Awesome.
But yeah, I mean, I think people really should take a break.
Yeah.
Go back, listen to that.
I agree.
To get a little bit of the history of what you do.
I agree.
The Noh style. And you're the only theater outside of Japan that does this.
Yes, we are. We are the only one. Oh, sorry. We are the only one in America. We're the only one that does this in English. There is another company in, I think it's the Czech Republic that does this in Czech. But they are the only other ones that I can think of off the top of my head. But yeah, we are the sort of the hallmark institution of Noh in English outside of Japan. We have a sort of sister company called Theater Nogaku, and they create as authentically as they can original English language Noh, which isn't really Theater of Eugen's major direction. We train extensively in Noh and Kyogen, which are traditional Japanese theater, traditional Japanese comedy and drama. And we use those styles to create new works. We develop either adaptations of classic Western literature, or in the case of Seen by Everyone, we take completely new scripts, or essentially new scripts, and we infuse them with elements, the ritual elements of classical Japanese drama, to bring out new meaning and new aesthetics for the works that we create. I can give a recap real quick of Noh if you'd like. For traditional Noh?
Yeah, let's do a real quick recap,
Sure.
and it's episode 29.
Okay,
We're
episode
now on
29.
what episode is this going to be? 162 or 3?
Really?
Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah, we've been knocking these out.
Wow.
We're moving fast.
It's going to be episode 163.
Yeah, 163.
Wow, congratulations on
Yeah,
that. That's
thank you.
amazing.
Thank you.
Wow, I'm glad to be back then.
Yeah, let's do a quick recap.
Yeah, so Noh is about 400 years old. It is a ritual drama formed in Japan based in Buddhism, a Buddhist tradition. Most of the plays in Noh are about the spirit of someone who has passed away. And in the Buddhist sense, they have been unable to escape the cycle of life and death because they have not been able to release their attachments to the world. The Buddhist philosophy is that our attachments to things, the idea of things or to emotions or places or people, cause suffering. The want for creates suffering. And the only way to truly escape suffering is to be able to come to terms with wanting and to release our wants. Not to have them satisfied, but to be able to move beyond having them at all.
And this is very big in Japanese culture.
Mm-hmm. Buddhism is a central part of Japanese culture, along with Shinto, which is the other classical Japanese religion. Together, they form a whole bedrock of society there, and it's a central part of daily life. So in Seen by Everyone, we're using these ritual elements and the physical expressions of grief that are common in Noh Theater and the stories of lingering ghosts, of hungry ghosts left behind by their desire and their attachment to recreate our understanding of contemporary American social media. The young deceased woman, Maggie, is the central figure, and her ghost, her digital ghost, is continuously present on stage, always trying to reconnect to the people that are still alive. And those that have survived are trying to figure out how they can release their attachments to her and to come to a resolution. We go through there are 7 scenes in the play, and each one of them follows a different stage of grief for Maggie. And so we watch her go from shock and denial all the way through her acceptance, and each of the other characters around her then has their own unique journey.
And Maggie's the main character.
Maggie's the central figure.
Okay.
Yeah. I hesitate calling her the main character because while she is the one that everyone is relating to, she actually has the fewest lines in the entire show. And it's incumbent on our wonderful actress Adrienne Dean to perform this piece almost exclusively through pantomime and dance with very little actual dialogue.
I would imagine that's very hard to choreograph.
It is very difficult, and she and I have been working very closely with Enormous Munoz, the gentleman who was a Huguenite, now is a founder of 5 on a Match. He's come back to San Francisco to help stage this production as well. He's in it, and the 3 of us have been working very closely to give Maggie and the character he plays, who is a bartender, no-name, mystical bartender, who a unique relationship, and to have them control the action of the world around them. It's been really interesting working with Adrienne, with Dean again. Dean played the Christmas Ghosts last year in Christmas Carol. It is wonderful to have her back working with us at UGen. She's phenomenal to work with. She brings a sort of beautiful ethereal grace to the stage in everything that she does. And so we're very lucky to have her, and then paired with Enormous Munoz, who is is now a professional actor. He's also a burlesque dancer. He has done dance instruction. He's a hula. He teaches hula both here and in New York. He was a professional hula dancer back in Hawaii. He has a huge range of performative backgrounds. And so watching them go on this journey together is just beautiful to see. It's really lovely having this kind of core Yugen essence in this production.
Now, is the story of Seen by Everyone based on a true story, or is it a story made up based on the collective of all the research done?
It's a combination of both. The young woman, the central figure, Maggie, she is based on another person whose real name I've never had revealed to me. And her story is fictionalized. I do know that she was a woman who did commit suicide. But other than that, I don't have any of the prescient details about her life, and we're not emphasizing those details. Maggie's dialogue is very unique in that she only has, I think, 8 distinct lines in the entire show, but every scene she's in, she uses those 8 different lines in very different ways. Her intention behind it changes with every delivery she gives, because the point of the piece is that when we are no longer able to communicate through social media, like when we've passed away or when we deactivate an account, all that is left of us are these digital records of the things that we have said. And those things are left forever. They're left permanently unchanging in this age of internet that we talk about, the right to be forgotten and all these things. You are always going to be communicating through the things that you've already left behind, and it's up to the reader and the person that's then going back to see what you've written to reinterpret it. And that's what we're doing with each of these scenes, is that Maggie's 7 or 8 lines get reinterpreted by the people around her. So our actress delivers them in dramatically different ways in every scene, even though it's the same lines, but all the characters that are around her, they react very differently based on what their state leads them to believe she's really saying. And so it's interesting looking at this particular young woman, because we are using relatively generic statements that this young woman left behind. And the characters that we've created, or that have been created, I shouldn't say we, that 5 on a Match created, they are bits and pieces of different people that they took parts from and then crafted a more through-line drama, through-line story for them. Some of these characters and their relationships are fictionalized. Like one of the characters in the show, his name is John. He is, in this iteration, he is Maggie's older brother. This young woman did not have an older brother, the actual historical person. And the character that has become her older brother was actually originally taken on a very different trajectory. It was he was a younger man who had gone through a series of very rough breakups, and then ultimately ended up in a situation that culminated in domestic violence and prison time. But that whole storyline was dropped completely in this iteration, and his relationship was recentered on his now sister character instead. Very different story. But the lines that he speaks were still lines taken from a couple different people from social media.
So there's 8 stages of the play. Correct?
7 stages of grief, yes.
Okay, so 7 stages of grief. At the end of this production, what should be the goal for? What's your goal for the audience, for the viewers? What's a big takeaway?
Yeah, our goal for the audience is to reach that point of acceptance, to be able to take a collective breath, exhale, and have that cathartic moment where whatever emotions they might be having, they're able to come to terms with them. We're also hoping that they'll then take away the question of what is it that social media has done for us? How have our public displays of life changed because of the way that we interact online? How does our online persona change based on the way that we talk, based on who we talk to? And if you were to go back and look at your own social media history, I know some people, especially big Instagram stars, have very carefully cultivated Instagram personalities, right? And it's very intentional. But I don't think most of us have those kinds of thoughtful or very intentional personas that we've created. And it is our hope then that people will go back and look to see how have they been publicly expressing themselves, and what is it that they've expressed, and is this what we want to be doing? Do we want to be living in this hyper-connected, completely visible way? Which is why the name of the show is Seen / by Everyone. The idea that everyone is seeing it, but everyone is also creating it.
Yeah, the whole idea behind social media is very interesting, because you have one side where people argue, well, it's just everyone trying to really be their best and really create a fake persona, really impress people. You see that a lot in Instagram with people, you know, they'll take money out of the bank, spread it all over, you know, a table, and then all of a sudden they're claiming they're rich, or people renting cars, fancy cars. And they just create this glamorous life on Instagram.
Right.
But then you have some other people that argue that social media really just exposes who we are. That's one reason why we all tend to get addicted to social media. And it just really exposes who we are, because we're very quick to post, quick to like, quick to comment, whether it's positive or negative.
It does. It helps express that the id that's inside all of us. It gives us a place to just let it all out, which is why in this piece we're so interested in what happens when that persona comes out to play. Like in a normal conversation, we wouldn't normally be sitting around talking in a stilted way about what we really feel about one another. That's something that we think about as being in therapy, or in those very heartfelt moments where we're connecting with a spouse or a partner or very good friends or family. But here on social media, it's like people are willing to be their rawest self. I wouldn't even say their best self, but just their most raw self, and put it all out there. And that is, I think, both healthy, because it puts us in touch with what we're actually feeling, and it's also I guess defeating is the wrong word, overwhelming. Because it does allow us just to live this life where we don't think about anything, and we no longer have to really think about the consequences of interconnectedness, of being in touch with one another. That if all I'm doing is commenting on, like, even if I'm commenting on an old friend's Facebook page, I can say whatever I want, and because I'm not seeing that person, I'm not really seeing their reaction or getting their response. And it's like I might think I'm having a genuine conversation, but we're probably not really.
Well, that's one of the same problems with text messaging, right?
Exactly.
Yeah, sometimes the receiver, will read your text message completely different than what you intended.
Exactly. And I've noticed that in my own personal use of text messaging, I've started to insert a lot more emojis just to help make my emotional intent much more clear.
Well, hopefully they understand what your emojis mean too.
Yeah, I stick with just hearts and smiley faces. I'm still really pretty basic on that one. I haven't gotten too far yet. And we actually bring those kinds of conflicts to life in this particular piece, particularly through two characters. One of them, her name is Elizabeth, played brilliantly by Annika Bergman, who was also in Christmas Carol last year. She is playing the Instagram queen. She's the character who when we let me back up a second. When we do our work, we usually talk about fans. Fans are really critical to Japanese theater. And instead of a fan, we've actually given her a selfie stick. And that stick is the essence of her soul.
You really modernized the play.
Yes, quite a bit. Well, the play is a very modern play. We're taking some of these traditional conventions and updating them so audiences might have a better understanding of how those conventions fit into contemporary drama. But Elizabeth, she carries a selfie stick. Annika typically has the ends of her hair dyed bright purple, which are beautiful. So we had her punch the highlights for the show. And her costume design is inspired entirely by Selena Gomez, who I guess right now is the uncontested queen of Instagram, something like this. This is what I'm told. I don't know. I'm apparently too old for the Instagram generation.
There's a lot of queens, a lot of kings of Instagram. It's hard to keep up.
Yeah, I know, right? But we cribbed some of her looks and the idea of like that trash chic look that's really popular right now amongst fashionistas. So Elizabeth is inspired by this, the woman who is constantly, very intentionally creating her persona, that idea of spreading out money on a table to show how rich you are. She is also the character who is in the deepest state of denial for the entire show because she doesn't want to admit that she's lost this woman who is potentially her best friend, potentially one of her romantic interests. It's a blurred relationship between Elizabeth and Maggie, and is always trying to show that she's living her best self. She's always her best self and her best life. In contrast to that, to one of the other characters, his name is Art, and Art is in any normal situation would be a total Debbie Downer. He is always on about how alone he is and how sad he is and how disconnected he feels, but he is that id, that there is really no filter, that you're constantly putting out what you think in any given moment. One of Art's last bits is this whole monologue that's just the sentence, "It's okay to be alone," over and over and over again, because that's actually what someone posted on their Facebook page, was just, "It's okay to be alone." They posted that sentence 67 times in a row.
Wow.
And that was it. And that was a whole post. And so we're looking at two very different kinds of cultivated or created personas. So Elizabeth, the queen of Instagram, versus total id Art, who is trying desperately to feel connected but can't in any way. And putting them side by side together has been really beautiful. Art is played by Alan Coyne, who is something of a big deal locally. He's a phenomenal actor and has brought a whole new life and meaning to this character that, honestly, on first read, I hadn't seen. And I've been thrilled to work with him and see that trajectory develop.
That's the one thing that I think is very amazing with your theater, Theater of Yugen, is that the amazing actors.
Yeah. I've been really fortunate to get some just absolutely phenomenal talent for most of my shows. This one is no exception. So our cast is Enormous Munoz playing the Mystic Bartender. I should know all of his lines are terms of service taken from Facebook.
Terms of service?
They're all from the terms of service or different ways that you interact or give feedback with Facebook. all that he gets to say. So he is clearly the algorithm brought to life.
Flagging posts.
Yeah, flagging posts. Like one of his questions is literally, was this answer helpful? Things like that. It's great. I love that one. Then Adrienne Dean is Maggie, Annika Bergman as Elizabeth, Alan Coyne as Art. I'm working together for the first time in almost 10 years with a wonderful actor named Paul Rodriguez. He is playing John, who is Maggie's older brother. And then two actors that I am very new to, Stephanie Wiggum, who works all over the Bay Area. She's playing Roxy, who is Maggie's childhood best friend. And then JJ Van Name, who just moved to the Bay Area. She is moving out of the East Coast. JJ, you'll have to forgive me. I can't remember if it's Pittsburgh or Philadelphia, but East Coaster. And she is phenomenal actress. She has just recently left Actors Equity and has come back to the more local community professional theater. And she is playing Aunt Helen, the aunt for John and Maggie.
So at what point did you decide you wanted to focus on a social media type production?
I've actually really been interested in social media for a number of years now. My husband works for Google, and so social media and the way that the internet plays into our lives has been a part of our consciousness since we moved to San Francisco 11 years ago. And I've always been fascinated with the ways that we interact with each other through social media. And so when Enormous told me that his company was developing this piece, I flew out there to go see it back in 2016. And I was really interested in getting my hands on it and working with it here in San Francisco. So Seen by Everyone's a project I've wanted to bring to the Disc Coast for quite a while.
So have you seen a lot of the research that was presented for the production?
Yes, I have. So what we were looking at was different ways that the people respond to posts, the different ways that emotions are influenced by social media, and especially with some of the cases in Facebook. A friend of mine just finished his PhD and received an award for his dissertation on researching emotions and Facebook, essentially. I don't want to say emotional manipulation, but the way that based on your viewing habits and the ways that you click through things, that it can actually change your emotions both positively and negatively. Negatively, of course, is what's been picked up a lot in the press, because we do understand that the more people interact with certain types of posts, the more the algorithm wants to feed that back to you. And especially in the wake of the 2016 election, as people become more partisan and more fixated on certain kinds of news sources, it either increases despair or increases anger. But it's also the case that when you interact with things that are more positive and that you are seeking out more positive based stories, not necessarily positive posts by other people, but by information about positivity, that it can increase your mood in a very helpful way. It can be affirmative.
It's very interesting.
Yeah.
Yeah, I know there's been a lot of talk and studies done where they're able to track dopamine release when people are using social media, especially when they're getting likes. And you see a lot of people addicted to that.
Exactly.
That's another issue.
Exactly. It can create an addictive kind of response.
And you see that too very common in children. Well, I guess a lot of people where they tend to take a photo, they don't like it, they take another photo, they don't like it, and they're constantly taking photos until they find the right photo.
Right.
Then they're posting photos, and if they don't get the number of likes they want, they delete the photo, and then post another photo.
Yeah.
And it's just this constant cycle until they get that dopamine fix.
Right. And it's interesting. I think of that as a marketing tactic. So when we advertise
Marketing
productions,
tactic for social media.
Well, for your it's like an individual. It's how we approach marketing for show. Let me give an example here. Like when we take production photos, we are always looking to make sure that we get the best shots. So we'll take like 500 or 600 different photos, and only 4 or 5 of them will actually end up being the things that we put out to the public, because we want to make sure that we have the right response, the right image, the right look. And I guess our dopamine response in that case is ticket sales, is people coming in and investing in this particular thing. And I find it fascinating that everybody has, through social media, has turned into their own marketer, and that by taking so many photos, making sure it's the exact one that you want, you put it out there, you see if you get the responses, and if you don't, you change it and you change tactic and do something else. And the payoff ultimately is that dopamine response, that addiction to the clicking. And I find it so interesting that because we've been given such a powerful tool to evoke that response in us, to give us that kind of biochemical feedback reward, that it's turned every person into a marketer of themselves, that it makes every person in charge of how they will sell themselves and their image to the world. And I find it really interesting, not just in how we are given feedback, but then in how we see those things that other people put out there. Because there have also been studies done about how looking at the images that people put out about how they're living their best lives increases depression response in people who see it, because they're only seeing the best of other people, and they're never seeing their struggles or their difficulties. And so whenever an individual is like let's say I'm scrolling through my friends list and I see all the beautiful things, the vacations they've taken, the cool dinners they've had, the dates they've gone on, the really gorgeous people they're interacting with. And I think, wow, I'm really struggling at work today. I'm having a really difficult time. I don't feel very attractive. Or like I see a friend of a photo of a gorgeous friend over on Muir Beach or whatever, and go, God, I'm not that attractive. I feel so bad about myself. That watching other people try to lead their best lives in search of their dopamine responses in turn makes other people feel worse. We start to spiral out of control and downward in our own depression based on the way that people have tried to curate their own image. And that kind of grief for me personally is very important. Working through that process of being able to say, well, it's okay if we don't get so many likes or so many clicks, or it's okay if other people are having adventures right now, and trying to remember that there's another person on the other side of that screen. And for me, that's one of the reasons Seen by Everyone is so important. It's just on that personal level of remembering that we are always interacting with a facade, with a persona. We're not really interacting with a person. And that even if it's not the loss of a person, that grief that you feel for yourself when you see other people living their best lives and you don't think you're competing with that there's a process to accepting that grief as well. And that's something that we have to go through. And for me, that's why Seen by Everyone has been therapeutic.
Wow. We're living through a unique time right now as humans, right?
Yeah, absolutely.
Because I remember when the internet, AOL. Remember?
Yeah.
AOL
yeah.
was just coming out.
Oh, yeah.
It took like 5 minutes for one photo to upload.
Yeah, absolutely. Remember that time very well.
Yeah. Yeah. And now we have information at our fingertips. And this kind of plays in with even politics. I've been talking about politics a little bit more lately on some of the last episodes, but really in the context that a lot of the younger kids these days have access to the internet. And I was just having this conversation last night with my stepdaughter too, that they have access to the internet. And so when I was in school, middle school, high school, no one talked politics.
Right.
But we also didn't have access to Twitter, to Snapchat, to Facebook at our fingertips at any minute of the day. So it's very interesting to see the younger generation grow up because social media is all they know. And it's very unique how even their mentality of how the world is or how it should be completely different from even just a generation prior that didn't quite grow up with social media, but was able to experience it in their 20s and 30s.
Right. We don't Facebook is not the thing that I rely on anymore for my day-to-day interactions with people. It's not where I go to for my news. I feel like I've finally started
dangerous for news.
Yeah, I know. I feel like I finally started adulting by actually going and looking for newspapers and looking online at like individual news purveyor sites at this point to try and get information.
You're proper adulting when you're paying for a newspaper online.
I'm about to get there. I'm so tired of 4 free articles a month from the New York Times. Oh my God. But it's like those are the kinds of things I would never fathomed having done as a kid, and I don't know if I would have ever gotten to that point had it not been for Facebook constantly curating that for me. Actually. And I think that point that you make about kids growing up now with constant interaction and constant accessibility at the touch of a button is so different from how we grew up. Because before, I remember when I was younger, it's like you would have to go and get the newspaper, find something, see if there's anything interesting in it, figure out if your family even subscribes to a major paper. Like my family only subscribed to the local newspaper. We didn't even subscribe to the major regional newspaper in Colorado, or the Denver Post. And so it's just whatever came up in the local news. Like we got, major headlines, we got major news headlines at night or whatever, but it wasn't like you were constantly being inundated with it. And I also think there's something that as kids become friends with adults on Facebook. I don't know if you're friends with your stepdaughter on Facebook. for example.
She actually doesn't have a Facebook
Ah,
account.
okay, good. That's probably good. But like,
But Instagram and friends there,
yeah. And so as people connect across generations, and as people that are more in our age demographic start sharing that information, there will of course be that person of a younger age who will click it and find that it's interesting, and then start sharing it, and suddenly it becomes a topic of conversation that you no longer have the age boundary between it, which I think. Well, at least for me, it feels like that's something that was much more common when I was growing up. That politics and news were things that really only adults talked about, and that unless you had a lot of interaction or spent a lot of time with adults in like a non-educational setting, that you were unlikely to engage in that way. But I think now that we don't have those same kind of generational divides, we get a much different feel for how we interact with information.
Yeah, and there's a lot of pros to it because now everyone has access to the information, but there's also a lot of cons. In fact, John Oliver just did a great piece on this just recently regarding Myanmar.
Oh, I didn't see it.
Yeah, so their internet, the term internet is exchangeable with Facebook because Facebook's really the only internet they have.
Wow.
They get a phone, and internet over there is very expensive, except Facebook's free on the phone.
Oh, wow.
So Facebook, they have access to Facebook, and everything's about Facebook. But the problem is Facebook's being used by political parties to disseminate very negative and terrible news regarding other groups of people. So they're having their own problem over there. And so the piece was about, at what point does Facebook need to step in to really regulate this hate speech? And very similar conversations that we've had, especially after the 2016 election here. So you have pros, you have cons and negatives. And I guess the only solution that I can really see to it, because I see all the pros of connecting people, and we want to be connected to more and more people, and
of course.
That's where technology, everything's going. At what point, or how do we regulate the negativity to it? And I guess there's not really a way to do that except educate people and really point out, this is what we look like. There's an artist, and I can't think of the name of the artist, but he basically took photos of people on their phones on Facebook, Instagram, and he removed the phone. He photoshopped the phone out. And he had this entire gallery of these photos of people, and it was hilarious. And it was just like people, he'd photoshopped the phone out, and people were just staring at nothing. And the way they looked was hilarious. But just pointing out the fact that we get addicted to our phones and, social media. So I guess in a way, that's what you're doing with your production. Pointing out, I guess, not just the negative, but also the positives of social media.
That we are able to remember one another. Again, another personal story. When I was in graduate school in Hawaii, one of my colleagues passed away very unexpectedly. And it was, it's probably 6 years ago now. It was the first time I'd ever seen a memorial page on Facebook because now when someone passes away, you're able to actually, your family can gain access to the page and convert it into a memorial page where everything you've ever written is still preserved, and people can add to it, and they can eulogize you online, but nothing is really taken away. And it was the first time I'd ever experienced that, and it was cathartic. It was wonderful to be able to have that moment where you get to say goodbye to a person that you didn't really get to you didn't get to say goodbye to. It was beautiful. And we actually are using that specific convention in this show to show that kind of beauty and that kind of ritual. But then you also look at then how that can become an unhealthy attachment. And for us, then it's about that fueling of social media and of how we continue to interact with things that can become unhealthy for us, so we can have the beauty in something as wonderful as being able to come to acceptance with the loss of a friend, or it can be something as unhealthy as the total obsession with yourself and with your sad state in life. And I think it's really important that we're constantly reminded that these are states of mind that the algorithms trap us into being into, and so it's helpful if we can remember that there's a life outside of this, and maybe it's a good time to try and get outside of that, to educate people about the power of social media and what it can do. And also just remember that there is actual education available there, that you can't trust everything you read. You shouldn't look at everything that's placed in front of you without a critical eye, that there does need to be a certain level of understanding of discourse to be able to interact as a decent human being. And I think we're having to change the paradigm of how we educate in order to make that happen.
We've spoken with a few educators here on the podcast, and it seems like one of the big topics amongst teachers and principals right now, especially here in the Bay Area and the local schools, is how do we teach children critical thinking?
Oh my God. Yeah.
In this day and age. And what really impressed me was a lot of the educators understand with Google, children really don't need to memorize who the 22nd president was.
Right.
No one really needs to understand. If they know, they can go to Google, look it up anytime.
Right.
They'll get that information.
Right.
So how do you teach critical thinking?
Right.
And I think that's the next evolution in education that's greatly needed, because we see a lot of people falling for, for lack of a better term, fake news.
Yeah, I agree. Because like when you look at the proliferation of websites like Breitbart and InfoWars, and not even just on the right, but things like Occupy Democrats and some other really trash sites on the left. It's like this isn't real information. And like I remember being a kid standing in line at the grocery store looking at the different newspapers and knowing that if it was the National Enquirer or the Weekly World News, it wasn't real. And if it was something like, if it had something, it was probably a major city's name in either Times or Post, it was more likely to be real.
Anything that ran Bat Boy.
Exactly. Yeah, the number of times that Bat Boy ran on the cover of the local newspaper, zero. It was zero. And like that was the only kind of level of critical analysis that you really had to put into the understanding of news then. But now that you have so many things that can dress themselves up through Photoshop and digital manipulation and look like legitimate news sources, or like the whole thing that's coming out with Russian interference by creating fake profiles and just commenting left and right everywhere.
Trolls in the box.
Yeah, exactly. And trolling everything. You have no way of knowing now, like, is this legitimate? Like how many points of confirmation do you need before something can be real? And that's not the kind of critical thinking that we've ever felt the need to teach kids to do. Because before, if you could look it up in an encyclopedia, it's probably real. If it was in Britannica, you've got it. Like, great, good for you. If you can get your hands on a newspaper and it says something in, say, the New York Times, awesome. You've got your information there. Unless we were teaching kids to go into journalism, we didn't really teach them to go and focus on multiple source site checking. But now that it's something everyone can do, should we be teaching that? I think that's a very interesting question.
Yeah, because even if someone can look up something on Google, and here's another argument, as to like for the whole, I guess, Google argument, but if something's very easily searchable, what makes it right?
Right. Yeah.
And then you get into that whole conversation. Well, it could be even a credible source, but what if they decide to switch things up?
Right. Or what if something is just wrong and like there's a mistake? There can just be mistakes. And that, I think, is that one of those problems with search algorithms is that the more people click on things, the more people share things. And the more that those things are shared across different platforms or on different websites, the higher those results get. Search engine optimization, obviously, this is a fairly common thing in tech these days. And just understanding how to optimize for search engine results can get really obviously fake information to the top of any search result very quickly. And understanding then what do you look at to try and combat that, and teaching people, and not just kids. I keep saying kids and children, but grown adults, members of my own extended family, teaching them to be able to say, hey, how do you look at this information and figure out whether or not it's real?
Well, my grandmother just got onto Facebook a year ago.
Yeah.
And my mother got onto Facebook probably 2 years ago. And it's funny to see their initial way they use Facebook is very similar to a lot of people just getting onto Facebook, discovering all these different news and articles, and it's very interesting to watch. And so it really doesn't matter what age. Right. It's once you get into it, right, and you start experiencing that, you can see a lot of the same initial patterns until they realize, oh, this is fake.
Right.
And yeah.
Right. and that globalization of information, I think going back to the idea of before the proliferation of the internet, when you didn't have the mass spread of information, when it wasn't as easy to read 7 different national newspapers and get websites from 17 different countries at once, you had a much smaller selection of information to choose from. And once you're suddenly, it's like being thrown into the deep end as soon as you get on a social media account and you have all of these different things that are bombarding you at once. You have no idea, because you've never heard of them. You have no idea whether or not they're real or they're not, or how accurate they are, or what their partisan leaning might be, or their biases, or their reporting errors, or whatever. You just have to start sifting through it. And I think we're now at the point where we're realizing exactly how damaging it is to rely on individual users to shift through that and not have some sort of culpability, and I don't want to say censorship involved from the companies that give access to this information.
Because you have to be careful with that too.
Exactly. And it's like, do you treat places like Google and Facebook as publishers and then require them to meet the same reporting standards as a publisher does? Or do you simply treat them as access points, that they are completely neutral third parties, and that they, as long as they don't, that the information is not damaging to their terms of service or is directly threatening to individuals like InfoWars was with Alex Jones, whether or not you deny them a platform. And it's such an interesting question. I keep going back to Breitbart in particular because Breitbart really terrifies me. But looking at Breitbart, it's like it just finally walks that point where it doesn't seem like it's a direct threat to any specific individual, but it's far enough over that it's clearly like, should we be doing something about the information that Breitbart it puts out into the internet?
Well, you bring up the algorithms too, which is very interesting to look at, because I remember at one point people were upset at Facebook because they were seeing so many ads, so many posts that they didn't like.
Right.
And they demanded Facebook at least give them control over what they wanted to see.
Right.
And Facebook then really turned around and created an algorithm that said, okay, we're going to give you what you want to see.
Right. Right. It's a self-reinforcing bubble. It's an echo chamber at that point. Yep.
But if you start going down the rabbit hole of some even fake news, it's going to keep feeding you that same type of material.
Exactly. I realized I actually sort of had that incident a couple weeks ago. I realized I clicked on something from the Washington Times, not the Washington Post. New York Times, Washington Post. Yes. Washington Times, no. And it started feeding me things. It started feeding me more Washington Times posts. And it's like, this doesn't seem real. Wait a second. And then I realized, what had happened. It's like just that one click was enough to be like, oh, maybe you aren't actually the extreme leftist that you claim to be. Maybe you should be seeing this. It's like, I feel really want to see this.
I feel like if you look at any news site, you have to just go incognito.
Yeah, absolutely.
Typically, people do incognito for other reasons, but now you're gonna have to go incognito for news.
Yeah, there are other good tricks for using incognito windows on news sites that I don't want to say in public because I don't want people to find out about them. But there are definitely incognito browsing is one of the best ways to go with it.
I can imagine putting this production together to create this visual and audio production. It's extremely hard because you're talking about a very modern subject.
Yeah.
Mixing it with a very old style.
Yeah.
What was the biggest challenge in putting that together?
So for us, actually, it was finding ways to utilize the classical styles in a contemporary setting. Because from the moment I started reading the script, obviously it's a very contemporary piece. It's got a very contemporary feel to it. The dialogue is written a contemporary way, so it doesn't really mash up with traditional Noh style dialogue or anything like that. The soundscape we want to be very electric, eclectic, recorded, and intentionally created rather than organic or acoustic, which is what you get from Noh. And so the biggest challenge was figuring out how do we take some of those aesthetics and infuse them into this script. Like physically, how can I use the movement style that comes with Noh and the basic idea that the performer finds a single neutral stance to stand in. We call it kamae in Japanese. If for anyone out there who's done martial arts, the word kamae probably means something to you. It just means stance in Japanese, but every traditional kind of thing, whether it's theater or music or, taiko drumming or karate, they all use the word kamae to indicate your neutral stance. And so each one of my actors, I had to figure out what their character's neutral stance was. And starting from that, then, we drilled traditional Japanese dance movements for a week and a half. and then figured out how can we modify those movements and the tempo that we use in that movement to create the staging for the piece while still retaining its contemporary vocal style and its contemporary scene, the contemporary set work, scenic design. That's the word I was looking for. And so that was definitely the hardest part of this, and making sure that we created a heightened atmosphere, something that was we use the term magical realism often in contemporary theater. So we're looking for that point of magical realism where things are just slightly enough over the line of realism that you can tell you're looking at something that's been created, but not so created as to be completely alienating and artificial. It doesn't cross the line into absurdism. Like with Samuel Beckett, who is probably one of the most famous absurdist playwrights ever. And so we're looking more at keeping things just heightened, altered reality. Like maybe you're in a dream of some kind where they make a sort of dreamlike logic where they're not necessarily A doesn't lead to B, but it still makes a kind of sense. And people are moving in a very intentional way to emphasize that intentionality behind the persona that they've created. The set is like a deconstructed bar. It's all like rough wood and steel, exposed metal, and hanging from the ceiling and from the sky are these big plexiglass squares that are arranged to look either like broken windows or maybe like a depixelating computer screen, but just to give that essence that you are in this otherworldly space. And when they're not looking like, when it doesn't create the technological look, it creates a beautiful sort of glittering look, like you are just in this ephemeral, other ethereal realm. It doesn't have to be a digital space at all. It could be any other kind of otherworldly place. And it's just strange enough that when looking at it, you go, something about this place is off. It's not so far over as to be like, I don't understand where I am. This is completely unintelligible. And it's not like, oh yeah, okay, clearly I've walked into a bar. I'm probably over in the Mission. I am at a place that was clearly inspired by like Esta Noche or something like that. It's just, you have small cues that the world is just slightly over that realm into realism, into fantastical, into magical.
Now, was putting this type of production more difficult for the actors?
Actually, I would say no, because we didn't have to drill them through the same kind of work that we did for, say, Christmas Carol, where for Christmas Carol, we rehearsed for 4.5 weeks in doing absolutely nothing but learning traditional Japanese theater styles. We learned basic dance movements, basic vocal styles. I even taught them parts of one of our classic comedies just so they would get a feeling for how the voice works, for how the body works, and for the aesthetic style of movement. For this production, we did a week of that, so we got a little bit of it, but I was much more interested in what they bring to the table from their organic responses as well-trained actors, and then stylizing those responses, and so in that way grafting the style onto what they were already doing, rather than a more traditional piece where we actually start with choreographing the whole piece, like move for move. It's set already, and then it's up to the actors to learn the movements more like you would learn a dance. And then the last thing that would happen in a traditional piece is putting in the actual intention and really acting it in a Western sense. Whereas in this one, we started with rough blocking, but then also looked at the acting and what characters were bringing to any given moment and then stylized it that way. I find it's a lot easier for Western actors to work in that way just because we don't have the amount of time we need to be able to train an actor to be able to have an organic, stylistically appropriate response in the traditional theater, which is one of the reasons it's been great working with Enormous, because he trained with Theater of Eugen for like 3.5 years, and he's done a number of shows with the company in the past. So he has the traditional training in his body, and he already understands it. So I didn't need to do very much stylistic work with him because he already knows how to do it. And it's one of the joys of working with Theater of Eugen company members, but we have been spread across the globe, scattered to the winds now, so aren't that many of us left to be able to do that work that easily.
But I would imagine when everyone comes together, that experience that everyone gains from working everywhere else in the world, coming back, you can put on a magical show.
Absolutely. Absolutely. We've gained so much experience then out in the world in just various different styles that while we might be doing traditional Japanese work in some of those instances, we're bringing little touches of other things that we've worked on. One of our longtime members is also a professional clown. He does not like circus clown, but he does clowning work, and everything that he does with us has that little bit of extra clowning edge to it, and it's just that much crisper and that much more interesting because of that. Another one of our company members, she lives up in Point Arena now. She used to do a lot of like variety show work, and so all of her work had this just sort of extra slapsticky sense of humor to it. My predecessor, our previous artistic director, has a lot of experience in Noh, and so whenever she would do her Kyogen work, her traditional when she would do her comedy work, her drama work, or the drama would infuse into it, and it was just this really beautiful sense of elegance that she would bring to the work. So it's really fascinating to see what people bring with them when they do the work with us. Yeah.
So opening day is October 5th.
Yep.
Correct?
Yep. Next Friday.
And then where can people buy tickets?
People can get tickets at www.theaterofyugen.org. There is a link right on our homepage, and there's also a link on the show page right there on the website.
Great. And then how long is Seen by Everyone going to run?
Number of days?
Number of days.
Yeah. We run October 5th through the 21st, Thursday, Friday, Saturday at 7, and Sunday at 4.
Okay. And then No Christmas Carol, when does that come back out?
We are opening the first Friday of December. I think it's December 6th. We run every weekend of December. We have shows on Friday and Saturday at 7, Saturday at 2, and Sunday at 4.
So I would imagine after Seen by Everyone, your entire day is going to be consumed by No Christmas Carol.
Yeah, absolutely. As soon as Seen by Everyone closes, I have 3 days, and then I start rehearsals for Christmas Carol.
3 days time off?
Yeah. Yeah, and it's not even really going to be time off because I'm going to have to get ready for Christmas Carol. But like my rehearsals start immediately after that. Fortunately, after January, I am off, and the next production coming up is Helen by Ellen McLaughlin. It's going to be directed by Shannon Davis, who is our new artistic associate. Shannon is a world-class director. She was just assistant director up at the Oregon Shakespeare Festival on Othello and Mannahatta. She was Scrooge last year on Christmas Carol. She's a phenomenally trained director, and she's going to be doing this very well-received, critically acclaimed contemporary adaptation of the myth of Helen of Troy.
Oh, very neat.
Yeah.
Very neat.
So it talks a lot about feminism, beauty, the place of women in society, especially as they're entrapped by men or by war, and the things that women have to do to struggle to come to terms with the world that has been created for them, rather than the world that they get to intentionally create. That opens up in March.
And that'll be also on your website.
That's also on the website right now. Yep.
Perfect. So, Nick, thanks for coming on to the podcast.
Thank you so much for having me.
Yeah, appreciate it. A lot of fun stuff we talked about today.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, it was great.
I'll see you next. I know you're going to be busy, but I'll be there for the opening on
awesome.
October 5th.
Oh, I will definitely be there. Good. Look forward to seeing you then.
Thanks.
Thank you.
Thank you so much for listening to the podcast. Thank you to our producer, Sam Lubman. Please subscribe, like, comment, and share the podcast. Remember, you can listen to the podcast on iTunes, Podbean, iHeartRadio, Google Play, SoundCloud, and anywhere else you listen to podcasts. For more information on my business as a property manager and real estate team, go visit my website at marcguzman.com. I really want to thank all of you for listening. It means the world to me, and I hope today's episode provides you value in your day-to-day life. I created this podcast to help showcase the many great people that live in this world and help share some knowledge that I've learned along the way in life. Again, thank you for listening. Check out our sponsors, and I'll catch you on the next episode.